Despite so many men lining up to propose, Needy turned them all away, one after the next. This baffled and worried her parents greatly. Welcome to my channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this video. It's going to be epic. Watch till the end, and let's dive into the fun together. In a small village called Oakwood, there lived a young woman named Needy. She came from a very poor family with just her mother, father, and herself. Though they did not have much money, Needy was blessed with extraordinary beauty. Her looks were so breathtaking, like rays of sunshine. Every man in the village, whether old or young, was struck by Needy's radiant appearance and wanted to marry her. Despite so many men lining up to propose, Needy turned them all away, one after the next. This baffled and worried her parents greatly. Her father worked as a carpenter, crafting furniture and home goods to make a meager living. Her mother stayed home as a housewife, tending to the household chores and cooking meals for the small family. As their only child, they had big dreams for Needy's future. One evening, Needy's parents sat her down under the large oak tree in their dirt yard. They wanted to have a serious discussion about her continual rejections of potential husbands. In a concerned voice, her mother asked, "Needy, why have you said no to all of your many suitors? These men come from good families and could provide for you." Needy simply replied, "I did not find any of those men attractive, mother. That is why I turned them down." Her parents furrowed their brows, struggling to comprehend her answer. With so many wealthy and respected men from the village proposing, it made no sense that their daughter could not find a single one appealing. But Needy would say no more on the matter. The next day, Needy went to visit her close friend Madeline. As she walked down the road, she passed by a striking young man with smooth dark skin. Though they were strangers, he flashed a warm smile at Needy. She could not help but smile back at his handsomeness before continuing on her way, her heart inexplicably racing. When Needy arrived at Madeline's house, her friend immediately noticed her flushed, giddy demeanor. "Why do you seem so excited?" Madeline asked with a sly grin. "You look like you've met someone special." "I'm not entirely sure yet," Needy admitted coyly. "But I promise, if it is something, you will be the first to know." Not long after, something indeed occurred that would change Needy's life forever. One afternoon, an expensive luxury automobile drove up to the family's rundown home, a vehicle grander than anything that had ever graced their village before. When the car doors opened, an elderly man adorned in a pristine suit stepped out. As the well-dressed visitor approached, Needy's mother gaped at him from where she was seated outside grinding herbs. "Good day, sir," she stammered, scrambling to stand up straight. "How may I help you?" "Hello, my dear woman," the man said in a distinguished voice. "Please forgive my unannounced arrival. I am William, a successful businessman from the city. I was told this is the residence of Mr. Clifford?" Needy's mother nodded dumbfoundedly. The wealthy William continued, "Splendid. You see, I have heard tales of your daughter's unparalleled beauty that have traveled even to my ears. It seems the young Needy has rejected all her suitors thus far. But perhaps she simply has not met a man of substantial means who can provide her with the finest luxuries in life." William's eyes glinted with confidence. "If you can persuade your daughter to marry me, a man of my stature and wealth, I vow to have your entire home renovated, and deliver you from a life of want and poverty. Your family shall never need for anything again. All I ask is for your only child's hand in marriage." The businessman's bold proposal stunned Needy's mother into silence. She could scarcely process the promises of riches he pledged in exchange for her daughter's hand. However, any hesitation she felt melted away as visions of high society status and material splendor filled her mind. Oblivious to the underhanded scheme, Needy wandered into the humble housing compound at that very moment. "Oh. Hello, who is our guest?" she asked politely after greeting the finely dressed stranger. "Ah, there she is," William proclaimed with delight. "The unmatched beauty herself. Please allow me to make your acquaintance, my dear." As the conniving man schmoozed and flattered Needy, she stood frozen in discomfort and bewilderment. Questions flooded her mind about this stranger's presence and intent. But before she could voice them, William made his departure. "Well then, I shall take my leave for now," he said, turning to Needy's mother. "I trust you will convince the girl to accept my most generous proposal when I return. It would be unwise for your family to let this opportunity pass you by." With that final weighted statement, William strutted back to his lavish car and sped away in a cloud of dust, leaving the two women in his wake. Needy immediately pressed her mother about the bizarre encounter, but she remained tight-lipped with a strange glint in her eye. That evening, Needy's father Clifford returned home from his woodworking labors. As soon as he stepped inside, his wife assailed him about William's earlier visit and shocking proposal to marry their only daughter. However, to Needy's great relief, her father remained staunchly against the idea. "He is far too old to be marrying our young Needy," Clifford bellowed, outraged at his wife's greed. "I will not allow my child to sell herself to that decrepit lecher, despite whatever riches he offered." Enraged by her husband's stubbornness, Needy's mother stormed out of the house in a fit of anger. Needy watched helplessly, deeply unsettled by the strange tensions gripping her family because of William's scheming. The next morning, Needy went about her usual routine, trying to push the anxiety aside. Yet her concerns resurged when her mother approached her outside with a distressed demeanor. "Needy, I must insist you reconsider that generous proposal from Mr. William," her mother started, desperation straining her voice. "He seeks to marry you and rid us of this impoverished life once and for all." "Mother, I cannot," Needy protested. "He is an absolute stranger, not to mention a lecherous old man who could be grandfather's age. You cannot be serious." But her mother was grave. "That man is immensely wealthy, my child. Can you not see this is the opportunity we have been praying for our entire lives? You must accept his offer, or you will never find peace." The adamant forcefulness in her mother's voice caused Needy to recoil in disbelief. Before she could muster a response, her mother stormed off, leaving her beloved only daughter greatly disturbed. In the coming days, Needy tried her best to put the conflict out of her mind. Yet the situation only spiraled stranger from there. Suddenly, wherever she went, to the market, around town, or even with friends, Needy saw terrifying visions of menacing snakes pursuing her every move. Whether the reptilian threats were mere phantoms or something more, she couldn't be sure. One night, she sat bolt upright from sleep, drenched in sweat, a scream lodged in her throat after a snake had chased her through her nightmare. When she tearfully told her parents of her torment, her father waved it off with the calming logic of an old carpenter. "It was just a dream, Needy. Do not trouble yourself over it." Yet her mother's piercing eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition, though she remained utterly silent and unmoved by her daughter's harrowing experience. From that day forward, Needy's waking life became utterly plagued by apparitions of hissing, slithering snakes. Out in the village, the strange stories of Needy's visions began to rapidly spread. Neighbors and friends started distancing themselves from the young woman they once adored. Whispers of her being possessed or mad grew louder and more frequent every day. In her loneliness, Needy sought solace in the reassuring presence of Gerard, the kind, handsome young man whose smile had once made her heart flutter. Though others mocked and dismissed her accounts of the snakes as lunacy, Gerard's gentle acceptance and loyalty never wavered. "Gerard, do you truly not see these snakes that?" Against her greedy mother's wishes, Needy followed her heart and married the kind-hearted Gerard. For a short while, the newlyweds were deliriously happy together, reveling in their new life as husband and wife. Needy finally felt like she had found the peace and tranquility she had longed for after years of turmoil with her domineering mother. However, their marital bliss was not meant to last. The first dark omen came when Needy's mother arrived to stay with them in their modest home. From the moment the bitter woman stepped through the door, her disapproving scowls and judgment cast a pall over the couple's wedded joy. "I still cannot believe you refused that wealthy man's proposal to marry this peasant boy," Mrs. Linda would sneer at her daughter whenever Gerard was out of earshot. She simply could not fathom why Needy would deliberately choose a life of modest means when the path to riches had been dangled before them. Gerard, for his part, did his best to bite his tongue and not inflame tensions with his new mother-in-law. As a humble but hard-working man, he earned an honest living through simple labor and entrepreneurial efforts, determined to build a happy home for his new family. Then one fateful day, an extraordinary bit of good fortune finally seemed to be shining down upon Gerard. He received life-altering news that a lucrative business opportunity had been offered to him, his chance to transcend poverty forever. "Needy, my love, I have been chosen to finalize an extremely rare and profitable contract," he announced to his wife with unbridled excitement. "All I need is to complete the requisite documents by day's end, and we shall secure financial abundance for the rest of our lives." Gerard got to work immediately, meticulously preparing the intricate papers and files that would serve as his written proposal for the deal. When at last he had everything properly assembled, he turned the important stack over to Needy for safekeeping until his scheduled departure the next morning. "Here, my dear wife. Please guard these with your very life until I return them safely to the investors," Gerard instructed solemnly. "Our family's future prosperity rests upon these pages." Needy accepted the heavy burden with grave seriousness, carefully stowing the documents away in a secure place where not even her prying, skeptical mother could access them. She knew this represented their potential pathway to a life of security and comfort. As night fell over their home, Needy's mother pulled her aside in private. "Do you truly trust that foolish husband of yours with something so immensely important?" she clucked derisively. "You never did listen to my advice when I urged you to marry for wealth instead of frivolous flight." "Mother, you know I love Gerard with all my heart," Needy sighed, wearied by the recurring argument. "And he has proven himself more than capable of providing dash." But Mrs. Linda was already waving a dismissive hand, stalking off in a foul mood as usual. Needy shook her head sadly. She had grown accustomed to her mother's perpetual disapproval and negativity by now. That night, an utterly horrific incident occurred that would shatter the couple's dreams of prosperity in an instant. As Gerard, Needy, and Mrs. Linda all slumbered in their beds, a terrifying, reptilian intruder slithered into the house from the inky shadows outside. Needy awoke with a blinding start, her breath catching in her throat as she watched the scene unfold right before her eyes. An enormous, thick serpent had coiled its way into their bedroom, Its beady black eyes locked right on the stack of documents she had so carefully secured only hours before. "No. Please." Needy tried to cry out, but her voice was frozen in terror. In one deft, sickening motion, the massive snake reared back its triangular head and gulped down the entire stack of paperwork in a single gulp. Needy's horrified shrieks finally broke her paralysis as the bloated beast slithered back into the night from whence it came. Gerard and his mother-in-law came rushing in, wild-eyed and disheveled from Needy's blood-curdling screams. But it was too late. The irreplaceable contract files were gone, devoured by an actual living nightmare straight from Needy's darkest visions. What in heaven's name happened here? Gerard demanded frantically as he took in his wife's ashen, shaking form. Between ragged sobs of disbelief, Needy tried to recount the macabre slithering injection that had transpired. But even as the words tumbled out, she could see the skepticism calcifying in Gerard's expression. Her mother-in-law, however, bore no such uncertainty. "I warned you, you stupid girl," Mrs. Linda spit out venomously. "This is what becomes of your wretched decisions." In that terrible moment, any seeds of warmth or compassion between mother and daughter withered on the vine for good. For Needy had irrevocably blown her family's one chance to escape generational poverty, all due to her madness. When the dreadful morning light finally dawned, Gerard was utterly despondent. How could he even attempt to represent his grand proposal to the investors without those vital documents spelling out the specifics? The business deal, his life's dream of financial security, was utterly erased. "3 years we have been married," he intoned hollowly, "and you have brought me nothing but loss and misfortune. Not a single child, only dead unborn after dead unborn." Gerard's mournful gaze carved into Needy like shards of ice. "And now, the first true opportunity to elevate our family has been ruined, struck down by whatever deranged demons possess you." The words lashed across Needy's face, flaying her of all hints of lingering joy or hope that her life had finally righted itself after so much past struggle and inner turmoil. As her husband's verbal onslaught persisted, she could only shrink back in devastated silence. From that day forward, the nightmare endured by Needy only compounded and intensified. Time after time, valuable belongings or assets would mysteriously vanish, as if the hungry serpent had slithered in during the black of night to steal them away. Pieces of jewelry, household items, hard-earned savings, all were systematically devoured, amplifying Gerard's apoplectic rages towards the wife he now fully blamed for the curses that seemed to plague their very existence. "What sort of marriage is this?" he would bellow again and again, his voice dripping with bitterness and vitriol as constant as his mother-in-law's glares. 3 anguished years crawled by in this hellish, emotionally battered state for the family. Needy became consumed by perpetual misery, tormented by her husband's escalating verbal and physical abuse while somehow unable to extract herself from the toxic situation. To her shattered psyche, it was as if the devil himself had opened the gates of hell before her very eyes, disgorging all manner of torment and madness upon her life. Still the visions of slithering serpents haunted her every waking moment and sleepless night, those inescapable harbingers of doom utterly fraying the final tattered remnants of her sanity. At long last, on one fateful evening when the cruelties of Needy's existence had become too unbearable to withstand, Gerard exploded in a volatile rage unlike any before. Like a man possessed, he turned on his sobbing wife with fists clenched and teeth bared. "Get out! Get out of my sight, you wretched snake-spawned demon," he howled, punctuating each word with thunderous, indiscriminate blows. When at last Gerard's ferocious outburst subsided, Needy could scarcely pull herself from the ground, bruised and broken. Through bloodied lips, she feebly pleaded to know what insatiable crime she had committed to deserve such unforgivable punishment, from the one person who had once promised to always love and cherish her. But her husband had long since turned his heart into impenetrable stone. With one final act of merciless cruelty, he hurled Needy's battered body into the cold night air, barring her forever from returning to the home. After being cast out of her own home by the husband who once doted on her, Needy found herself descending into an inescapable pit of despair. With nowhere else to go, she had no choice but to seek shelter back at her parents' run-down family compound in the village of Oakwood. However, her self-righteous mother offered Needy no sympathy upon her shameful return. "I warned you not to throw your life away with that peasant fool Gerard," Mrs. Linda clucked indifferently. "Whatever torment has befallen you is simply the cross you must bear for your stubborn choices." Those cold words cut deeper into Needy's psyche than any physical beating. She was left to suffer in solitary silence, her husband's explosive rage still ringing in her ears alongside visions of the monstrous serpents that seemed to haunt her very existence. Once she had been the radiant beauty worshipped by all in Oakwood. But now even her closest friends and neighbors shunned and scorned Needy as if she were diseased, muttering about demonic possessions and curses whenever she came into view. Day after agonizing day, Needy's only company was the unshakable waking nightmares that plagued her every waking moment. Everywhere she turned, the watching eyes of sinister serpentine shapes took form, from household objects to shadows on the wall and even clouds in the sky. The pale young woman found herself confined to a personal, inescapable hell on earth, never knowing where or when the next vision of scaly terror would slither into being before her eyes. Madness seemed to encroach upon her traumatized mind from all sides, weathering her sanity down to a razor's edge that grew ever finer. Then one sweltering afternoon, everything changed. Needy had spent that day largely avoiding human contact as usual, huddled in fearful isolation at her parents' derelict property. Only when evening fell did she summon the strength to make the short journey into town for paltry rations at the market. As the sunset painted everything in its vivid crimson hues, Needy cradled her basket of paltry vegetables and grains tightly and began the solemn trudge back home. Hyper-aware as always of every potential stirring movement, her eyes remained firmly trained on the dusty path ahead. Which is why she lurched backward in shock, very nearly dropping her belongings, when the unthinkable happened directly in her line of sight. There, slithering alongside the property fence of her childhood home, was the longest, thickest serpent Needy had ever laid eyes upon, real or imaginary. The snake seemed to undulate endlessly in her periphery as she froze in place, its heated body leaving a trail in the parched dirt. Panic gripped Needy's chest as the reptilian beast continued its approach, merciless obsidian eyes locking on to her petrified form. Suddenly, to Needy's utter horror, the massive serpent reared up on its thick tail, easily towering over her at 6 feet tall. Its wedge-shaped head weaved back and forth, as if regarding her with a sentient sort of dark intelligence. Needy's scream of primal terror rent the air as she reflexively cowered backward, nearly blacking out from sheer fright. In her dizzy, shrieking skirmish to escape, her market basket upturned and spilled its pathetic contents uselessly onto the ground. But just as quickly as it had arisen, the titanic serpent stopped its aggressive stance, almost seeming to momentarily study the shaking, wailing woman in piqued curiosity. Then, to Needy's utter bewilderment, the gigantic reptilian form began to shift before her very eyes. its entire body elongated and contorted, scales rippling like waves as wicked spines erupted along its spine. One very hot day, Needy had gone to fetch water from the village well. As she made her way back home, her arms straining with the heavy buckets, she was oblivious to the fact that the serpent beast had already infiltrated her family's humble compound. Little did she know, the vile creature had slithered inside the rickety old house, letting itself into Needy's meager bedroom quarters. There, it began the grotesque transformation from reptilian form into a closer approximation of a human shape. Needy trudged through the dusty yard towards the front door, her thoughts consumed with securing some refreshment after her arduous journey. However, just as her foot crossed the threshold into the shaded interior, she was met with a sight that nearly caused her to drop the pails in shock. There, hunched over in the dim corner of her bedroom, was the unmistakable serpentine silhouette in the midst of its unnatural metamorphosis. Needy's eyes widened in revulsed horror as she witnessed bulges erupting across its scaly hide, sickeningly extending into rudimentary appendages. Its distended form wriggled and convulsed, organs and bones grotesquely rearranging themselves into a vaguely humanoid configuration. A guttural shriek of primal terror tore from Needy's throat as she watched the final stages of its profane transfiguration. When at last the serpent thing stood upright in its newly distorted shape, Needy was paralyzed at the shocking familiarity of its bizarre visage. "Mother," she cried out in a strangled rasp, feeling her grip loosen on the water buckets until they clattered to the floor. Is that you?" The lesson on the story is marry for genuine love and mutual respect rather than for wealth or societal status. Greed and manipulation can lead to suffering and heartache. Recognize your self-worth and have the courage to stand up for yourself. Mutual respect and understanding are essential in relationships. Superstitions and unfounded beliefs can lead to unjust treatment and isolation. Provide emotional support and empathy to loved ones during difficult times. The Bible says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. 1 Timothy 6 verse 10, NIV.